Hello, Key Stage 1, it's Miss French here, and I am reading Chapter 6 to you today. It is called In the Swim. Bobby and Pat woke up early next morning. "I'm hungry," Pat said. "When can we eat?" "We'll just have to wait," Bobby said. "Men don't get up as early as we do." "Oh," said Pat. "What's that up there? Some kind of bird?" Bobby laughed. "I see you are wanting to know again. Gaffer told me about those. That's an aeroplane." "A what?" "An aeroplane. It's a bird that man makes to carry things like people in. It has an engine in it. Listen." Pat listened to the aeroplane. Of course Bobby was right. "It doesn't move its wings," she said. "No, and it doesn't sing like a bird," said Bobby, teasing her. "And it doesn't lay eggs either. The engine pulls it along." "Oh," said Pat doubtfully. She didn't understand at all, but didn't like to say so. By now the white-haired man was at the edge of the pool with a basket, but instead of throwing the fish, he held one up in his hand. Bobby jumped out of the water and grabbed it. Then Pat tried to do the same, but nearly bit the man's hand off. Both Pat and the man looked very worried, but then Bobby and the men laughed. The two men talked for a minute, and the younger one went away. When he came back, he was wearing just swimming trunks. He came and stood on the edge of the pool, shivering. Pat was sorry for him. "He's all bare," she said, "except for that coloured thing round his middle. He looks frozen." "I told you that men don't have fur like us," said Bobby. "You'd think he would sink if he came into the water." At that moment the young man dived in. He was a good swimmer and swam overarm as fast as he could to the other end of the pool, turned under water and swam back. Bobby wasn't at all impressed. Fancy waving his arms about and all that splashing with his legs. I'm sure he'd go faster if he didn't waste his energy like that. "Why hasn't he got webbed feet like us?" asked Pat. "They would help him." The man changed to breaststroke. "That's better," said Pat, "but he doesn't look silly when his head comes out of the water, just like a fish, with his mouth open like that. In fact, I'll call him Fish Face." "Look at the way he kicks his feet," said Bobby. "It must be because they aren't webbed, and he hasn't got a big tail to steer him. Man does have a silly shape." Just then Fish Face turned over on his back and floated beside them. "That's nice," said Pat. "I am glad he doesn't sink. Do you know what?" "No," said Bobby. "I don't want to either." "Oh," said Pat. "B boy otters. I was going to say that I think Fish Face would like a game. Let's see." She paddled round him and then pulled him under the water. They tussled a bit, and then Bobby nudged them to the surface again. "Careful," he said. "Men can't stay under water as long as we can. You'll drown him." Certainly the man looked very red in the face. Pat quickly swam towards him to make sure he was all right, but Fish Face thought she was going to play again. "Awak!" he yelled. "Awak!" Pat was startled. Bobby laughed. "Perhaps Fish Face isn't quite so silly as we thought, if he knows our words for stop, help. Let's see if we can persuade him to say anything more." But the man didn't seem to know any more sea otter words. Soon man and otters all lay quietly on their backs together. The man even held Pat's front paw for a while. She liked that. The older man was looking on. He took a mussel and a stone from a basket and threw them to Fish Face. "I bet he doesn't know what to do with them," Pat said, but the man did. He placed the stone on his chest and rapped the mussel on it. He wasn't a very good shot, and he hit himself a good deal before the mussel broke. Then he handed it to Pat and climbed out of the water. Bobby made it quite clear that he wasn't going to be left out. "What about me?" he called. It needed more than one mussel from the man to make him be quiet. Later they saw Fishface go off with one of the nets. When he came back, he had another otter in it. Pat stood up, her eyes bright, her whiskers quivering. "Who is it?" she asked. "Is it someone we know? Do you think it's Gaffer?" She and Bobby watched the man go into the warm hut. "I'm going to go and see who it is," Bobby said. "You stay here while I find out." But of course, Pat followed him to the hut. They banged on the door with their paws, and Whitehair, that's what they call him, opened it with a look of surprise on his face. They just lolloped past him, straight to the bath. It wasn't Gaffer, it was Dud, the young otter, looking very ill indeed. He was even refusing the fish he had been offered. He had never been known to refuse food in his life. "Come on, Dud," said Bobby, "eat up. They're nice men, and they'll soon have you well." "You're sure they're not just fattening us for our coats?" asked Dud. "No, I don't think so. Pat is certainly getting fatter, but they don't seem to want her coat, though Fishface could do with it." Dud needed no more encouragement. He ate up the fish and was soon dried and lying on the mattress. Pat and Bobby lay beside him until he fell asleep. Then they noticed the men throwing some mussels into the pool, so they quickly went there for their supper. As they lay on their backs before going to sleep, Pat turned to Bobby. "Do you know, I feel different," she said. "I've been too interested all day to ask many questions. What do you think that means?" "It means you are almost fit to live with," said Bobby. "Or you would be if you let me go to sleep. Good night."